For thousands of years, the most powerful leaders on earth, pharaohs, emperors, generals, made life or death decisions based on a single vision that came to them while they slept. What did they know that we've forgotten? Imagine yourself as a farmer in ancient Mesopotamia, standing barefoot on earth that would one day be called the cradle of civilization. It's around 3,000 years before Christ, and the night sky above you is so densely packed with stars that it feels less like a backdrop and more like a living witness to everything happening below. You've worked since dawn, grinding grain, mending tools, coaxing crops from soil that demands constant negotiation. Your body is exhausted in the way that makes sleep not just possible, but inevitable, almost irresistible. You lie down on a simple mat and within moments you're gone, transported into another world entirely. In this dream, you're flying, not with any device or magic, but simply rising into the air, your body weightless, the world below growing smaller. In the dream, this feels like the most natural thing in the world. Then the scene shifts. You're standing in a room you've never seen before, yet you recognize it. Someone appears. A figure made of light, or perhaps wisdom itself. They speak without words. You understand perfectly. Then you wake. Your eyes open to darkness. Your heart is still racing. The dream is already beginning to fade like water through your fingers. But certain images remain sharp, almost sharper than waking memory. You lie there in silence, trying to hold on to the sensation, knowing without knowing why that something important just happened. Something was trying to reach you across a boundary that most people can't perceive. This moment, this experience of being touched by something beyond the waking world, would have had a name in ancient Mesopotamia. It would have meant something specific. The dream wouldn't be dismissed as random neural nonsense, a glitch in the sleeping brain. It would be taken as seriously as any message from a messenger, perhaps more seriously. Because unlike a messenger who could lie or misunderstand, the dream came from somewhere deeper. It bypassed the waking mind's defenses entirely. For most of human history, this is how people understood the night. Across every ancient civilization, from the dusty temples of Egypt to the jade-decorated palaces of China, from the stone temples of Mesopotamia to the sacred groves of Greece, dreams weren't treated as marginal phenomena. They weren't jokes or interesting oddities. They were treated as communications, real ones carrying information that mattered for survival, for health, for understanding yourself, for knowing what you should do. What changed? How did we move from a world where entire temples were built specifically for people to sleep in sacred places and receive visions, to a world where you might see a therapist who barely asks about your dreams? How did we arrive at our current moment, where most people dismiss their nightly visions with a shrug? Oh, it was just a dream, that tiny word just containing entire centuries of dismissed wisdom. The answer lies in one simple historical fact. For about 200 years, one culture decided that dreams didn't matter. During the Enlightenment and the rise of mechanistic science, dreams became classified as noise, random firing in the sleeping brain. Evolutionarily useful perhaps for memory consolidation or threat simulation, but certainly not vehicles for genuine communication or wisdom. The scientific worldview had no use for them. They couldn't be quantified precisely, couldn't be controlled in laboratory conditions, refused to explain themselves according to rational principles. So they were shelved, dismissed, forgotten. But here's what's striking. That 200-year dismissal was, historically speaking, barely a heartbeat. For thousands of years before that moment, every single culture on Earth came to similar conclusions about dreams. The Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Greeks and Romans, the Indians and Chinese. Without any way to contact each other across vast distances, without any scientific instruments, without any psychological frameworks, these civilizations independently discovered that dream meant something, that they communicated, that they could reveal things about your health, your future, your character, things you needed to know. That kind of universal agreement across separate civilizations isn't usually a coincidence. When every culture on Earth notices the same phenomenon and treats it with similar seriousness, it typically means they've discovered something real, something worth paying attention to. What they discovered was nothing less than a language, the language your unconscious mind speaks. It's a language made of symbols and metaphors, of narrative and emotion, of imagery that makes perfect sense in the moment, but becomes cryptic upon waking. It's a language that carries real information about who you are, what you need, what's approaching in your life, what parts of yourself you've rejected or forgotten. The ancient dream interpreters weren't fortune tellers or mystics claiming supernatural powers. Many of them were physicians. Some were philosophers. They were observers, pattern finders, people who paid close attention to the relationship between what someone dreamed and what subsequently happened in their life. And over centuries of observation, they began to map this territory. They created systems. They documented their findings. They passed their knowledge to apprentices. They developed expertise, real expertise, in something we've spent the last few generations trying to rediscover. This is the journey we're about to take together, not into mysticism or superstition, but into the archives of human knowledge about one of the most intimate and mysterious aspects of being alive. What happens when consciousness itself divides in sleep, and another part of the mind awakens to speak? On a clay tablet dating back 4,100 years, someone wrote down exactly what their nightmares meant. They were wrong about many things, but they were uncomfortably right about others. We're traveling back to Mesopotamia, the birthplace of written civilization, to the moment when someone first decided that dreams were worth documenting. The Sumerians and Babylonians didn't treat dreams casually. They created entire systems of interpretation, some of which survive to this very day in fragments on museum shelves and in university collections. The place was called the House of the Dream, or Bit Emedu in the ancient language. This wasn't a hospital in the modern sense, though it served some of the functions we'd recognize from hospitals. It was more like a combination of temple, medical clinic, and school. Professional dream interpreters worked there, much like modern therapists work in their offices. People came with their dreams. The interpreters listened. They questioned. They consulted written records of similar dreams and their outcomes. Then they offered interpretation, not as certainty, but as skilled analysis of what the unconscious mind was trying to communicate. The actual dreams recorded on these tablets are remarkable for their specificity. A king dreams of being chased by demons. The interpreter marks this as a divine warning, a message that something in the king's waking life is pursuing him, that danger is approaching, that he should be vigilant about threats. A merchant dreams of water. The interpreter reads this as profit, as fluidity in business, as the flow of goods and wealth. A woman dreams of ascending to heaven. The interpreter recognizes this as spiritual elevation, as readiness for something greater. A farmer dreams of his crops burning. The interpreter sees this not as prediction of actual fire, but as a symbol of loss, of something valuable being consumed. What makes this section of human history so gripping isn't that they were right about everything. They certainly weren't. What's remarkable is the realization that these weren't random guesses. These were patterns observed across hundreds of years. This was the world's first psychological study, before psychology had a name. Before Freud, before Jung, before any modern framework existed, these ancient Mesopotamian practitioners were systematically observing the human unconscious and mapping its territory. They understood something that would take the modern world centuries to rediscover. That dreams speak in metaphor. That context matters absolutely. That the same symbol means different things depending on who's dreaming it. They recognized that the unconscious mind communicates in a language all its own, and that language is learnable. It can be studied. It has patterns. It's not arbitrary or random. In the house of the dream, they were doing something that would astound a modern neuroscientist if they could witness it. They were taking someone's nightly vision, something that most people would dismiss as irrelevant, and using it as a window into the person's deepest concerns, their unconscious preoccupations, their health conditions, both physical and psychological, and their probable future. They were treating dreams not as footnotes to waking life, but as primary data, as real communications deserving serious attention. The dreamer would come in troubled. Perhaps they'd had a nightmare that disturbed their sleep. Perhaps they'd received a vision that felt significant, but they didn't understand it. The interpreter wouldn't immediately tell them what it meant. Instead, there would be conversation. Who are you? What's your role in society? What's happening in your life right now? What worries occupy your mind? What do you desire? The interpreter was conducting what we might now call a psychological interview, gathering context that would completely change the interpretation. When this system worked, and by most accounts, it worked often enough to justify the investment of thousands of people's resources, it worked because these practitioners understood that interpretation requires knowledge of the dreamer. A dream of falling means something entirely different for a person who's afraid of failing in their career than it does for someone who's physically afraid of heights. A dream of abandonment means something different for someone whose spouse just left them than for someone in a stable relationship. The symbol is the same. The meaning is completely personal. This was the foundation upon which all subsequent dream study would be built. Not divination, not magic, but careful observation of the pattern between what the unconscious produces and what it means for the person who produced it. The house of the dream was the world's first psychological training ground, and its practitioners were the world's first therapists, using a tool, the dream, that their modern successors largely forgot existed. Imagine traveling hundreds of miles, paying enormous sums of money, wealth you might have spent on practically anything else, sleeping in a sacred temple for days, all for a single dream that might last only minutes. What would need to be true about dreams for millions of people to consider this rational? This practice happened. Not once. Not in one isolated culture, but repeatedly, across multiple civilizations, over thousands of years. The dream temples weren't unique curiosities. They were major institutions that drew pilgrims the way modern people might travel to hospitals seeking treatment, or universities seeking education. In Egypt, the temples of Asclepius, originally Imhotep, functioned partly as healing shrines and partly as dream incubation centers. People arrived bearing illnesses, both obvious physical ailments and mysterious psychological conditions. They were guided through rituals of purification and preparation. They would be given instructions about setting their intention for the dream. Then they would sleep in a sacred chamber. And whatever dream came to them would be considered significant, carrying healing potential or important information. What's remarkable is that many people reported genuine healing. They slept in the temple sick or troubled, and they woke relieved. The modern temptation is to dismiss this as placebo effect, as if that explanation somehow reduces what happened. But placebo effect itself is real. It's the mind affecting the body, something that shouldn't be possible in a purely materialist worldview, yet it demonstrably happens. The ancient dream temples understood something we're only now relearning, that accessing the unconscious mind through intentional dreaming can produce measurable changes in physical and psychological states. The practice of incubation, sleeping in sacred spaces to receive visions, wasn't casual, it was structured. The environment was carefully controlled. The intention was clearly set before sleep. The dream was discussed and interpreted immediately upon waking, while it was still fresh. The entire community might be involved in witnessing and validating the dream's significance. Why would civilizations invest such resources in something as ephemeral as dreams? The answer, from their perspective, was obvious. Because dreams contained information you couldn't get any other way. Survival information, divine will, medical diagnoses, strategic guidance, spiritual revelation, psychological understanding. All of these things flowed through dreams, and accessing them required intentional, structured engagement. Remarkably, when we examine the evidence, when we look at the documented dreams and their outcomes, the ancients were often right by. A warrior's dream preceding a battle that turned out to match the dream's symbolism. A healer's dream revealing a remedy that actually worked. A patient's nightmare revealing a disease that hadn't yet manifested physically, but would appear months later. These weren't random successes. They were consistent enough to justify institutional investment. What the ancients understood, even if they wouldn't have used this language, was that the unconscious mind is processing information constantly. It notices everything. It sees patterns. It picks up on subtle cues in the environment. It has access to your own body's knowledge about its condition. It remembers everything you've ever experienced, even things your conscious mind has forgotten. When you deliberately access the unconscious through dreaming in a prepared state, you're not accessing supernatural knowledge. You're accessing the intelligence of your whole self, the intelligence that exists below conscious awareness. Building temples for this purpose wasn't illogical. It was investing in a technology that, despite their not fully understanding the mechanism, consistently produced valuable insights. In a world without modern medicine, without psychology, without brain imaging, without any of the tools we use today, the Dream Temple was perhaps the most sophisticated technology available for understanding yourself and your life. In ancient Egypt, dreaming of water meant one thing. In ancient China, dreaming of water meant the same thing. In ancient India, identical. The odds of this being coincidence are so small, we might need to reconsider what ancients actually discovered. This is one of the most startling discoveries when you begin examining the dream traditions of separate ancient civilizations. Not their similarities in approach or their similar institutional structures, but the shocking consistency in their symbols. Across completely isolated cultures, separated by continents and centuries, with no possibility of contact or influence, the symbols that appeared in dreams carried similar meanings. Water. In every tradition we examine, Mesopotamian texts, Egyptian papyri, Greek mythology, Indian Vedic literature, Chinese Taoist writings, water consistently symbolized the unconscious mind, emotion, transformation, and money. A dream of drowning wasn't a prediction of literal drowning, but a metaphor for emotional overwhelm, for being submerged in feelings too strong to manage. A dream of water flowing peacefully indicated emotional fluidity, prosperity, positive change. Murky water suggested unclear emotions, hidden knowledge, the unknowable depths of the psyche itself. Fire carried similar consistency. Across all these independent traditions, fire meant purification or destruction, divine presence or danger, transformation or devastation. Sometimes both simultaneously. A dream of fire could warn of actual danger, or symbolize the purifying flame of passion consuming something in the dreamer's life. A pharaoh might dream of fire descending from heaven and interpret it as divine favor. A merchant might have an identical dream and interpret it as warning of loss. The symbol was consistent. The application required understanding the dreamer. Death. Here's where the universality becomes even more striking. In virtually every ancient dream tradition, dreaming of death, especially your own death, rarely meant literal death. Instead, it symbolized transformation, endings, and new beginnings. The death of the old self, the completion of one phase of life, and the beginning of another. A woman might dream of dying and wake to find that the dream preceded a profound psychological shift in her. A man might dream of the death of a beloved and find that the dream was actually about the death of his old relationship with that person before it fundamentally changed. What we're looking at here is something that modern psychology, particularly the work of Jung, would later call archetypes, universal patterns in the human unconscious. But the ancients didn't need modern terminology to recognize the pattern. They simply observed it, they documented it, and they noticed that no matter where humans appeared on the globe, the unconscious mind seemed to use similar symbolic language. The question this raises is profound. Why would this be? If these symbols were purely cultural inventions, completely arbitrary, you would expect variation. You would expect the Egyptian symbol for water to be different from the Chinese symbol. You would expect their interpretations to diverge. But they didn't. Instead, the consistency suggests something deeper. That these symbols aren't arbitrary cultural creations, but rather reflect something fundamental about human consciousness itself. When your brain dreams, it doesn't dream in words. It dreams in images and emotions, in narratives and symbols. When the unconscious mind wants to express something about emotion, about the depths of yourself, about the unknown territories of the psyche, it reaches for water. Not because it learned this symbol from culture, though culture certainly shapes how it's expressed, but because water naturally maps onto these concepts. Water is fluid. It's deep. It can be calm or turbulent. It sustains life. It can overwhelm. It carries things. It hides things beneath its surface. Similarly, when the unconscious wants to express purification or danger or transformation, fire naturally serves this purpose. Fire burns away the old. Fire produces light from darkness. Fire can warm or destroy. Fire can't be grasped or controlled. It exists between solid and gas, between the material and the ethereal. What the ancients had discovered through centuries of observation was that these symbols aren't metaphorical in the sense of being arbitrary comparisons. They're archetypal. They express something about the actual structure of human experience and the patterns through which the unconscious mind processes that experience. Modern research on dreams and psychology has validated what the ancients observed. When neuroscientists examine which brain regions activate during dreaming, they find that the symbolic centers light up. The parts of the brain that process meaning and emotion and metaphor, not the parts that process literal logical language. This is why you can't argue with a dream while you're dreaming. Dreams speak in a language that bypasses the rational mind entirely. They speak to something deeper, the emotional, intuitive, symbolic intelligence that exists beneath language. And here's what's remarkable. That symbolic intelligence, that deep pattern recognition system, seems to be universal across humanity. The same symbols appear because we're all responding to the same fundamental aspects of existence. We all experience emotion. We all face transformation and death. We all have unconscious depths. We all store memories and fears and desires we're not consciously aware of. The dream symbols are the universal language through which this deep part of our minds communicates about these universal human experiences. This explains why a dream book written 3,000 years ago in Egypt can still offer genuine insight into a modern person's dream. It's not because magic transcends time, but because the fundamental structure of human consciousness doesn't change. Your brain dreams the same way an Egyptian's brain dreamed. Your unconscious uses similar symbols. Your emotional depths produce similar imagery. The language of the deep mind remains constant across cultures and centuries. Two people have identical dreams. One is interpreted as a blessing, the other as a curse. The dream didn't change. Only the person did. This is the secret that separated genuine dream interpreters from charlatans. Ancient dream interpretation was never one size fits all. This is crucial to understand, because it's where the sophistication of ancient practice becomes truly apparent. The most skilled dream practitioners understood something that a literal dream dictionary can never capture. That the same symbol means completely different things depending on who's dreaming it. Consider the nightmare of drowning. For a merchant whose entire livelihood depends on ships carrying goods across dangerous waters, a dream of drowning might be interpreted as a warning about a specific voyage, about danger to his business, about risk he needs to take seriously. For a healer whose business is stable, the same dream of drowning might be interpreted as emotional overwhelm, perhaps indicating that the healer is taking on too many patients, absorbing too much of others' suffering, becoming submerged in work. For a woman whose husband is a fisherman, the dream might carry a third meaning entirely. Anxiety about his safety, fear of losing him, dread of widowhood. Same symbol, three different meanings. How did the ancient practitioners navigate this potential confusion? They did something remarkably like what a modern therapist does. They asked questions. They gathered biographical context. They wanted to know, who are you? What's your status in society? What challenges are you currently facing? What worries occupy your mind? What are you hoping for? They conducted what we might now call a psychological assessment before offering interpretation. Artemidorus of Daldis, a dream interpreter from the 2nd century CE, whose work remarkably survives intact in a collection called the Onero Critica, left us explicit evidence of this approach. He was adamant that interpretation without context was worthless. A king dreaming of his throne being empty. That's interpreted as a warning that his power is being questioned, that he needs to attend to threats to his authority. The same symbol, an empty throne, means something completely different if it appears in the dream of a common laborer. For the Wobberer, it might indicate aspiration, or it might indicate something entirely different, depending on his specific life circumstances. Artemidorus documented another case that reveals the sophistication of his analysis. A slave dreams of ascending a ladder. Literally, the symbol means elevation, success, overcoming obstacles. But for a slave, Artemidorus interprets this dream as a warning. Ascending the ladder means attempting to rise above his station, which in the rigid social structure he lived in would be both impossible and dangerous. The dream is interpreted not as promise but as caution, a warning that hope of elevation would lead to broken dreams or punishment. This is proto-psychology at its finest. The ancient dream interpreter wasn't applying mechanical symbol associations. They were conducting sophisticated analysis that recognized that the same symbol carries different meaning for different people, that a person's social position, economic circumstances, current challenges, and psychological makeup fundamentally shape how a symbol should be interpreted. That dreams aren't predicting external futures so much as revealing internal states and anxieties. What emerges from studying this practice is a picture of something that looks remarkably like modern psychological assessment. The ancient interpreter was gathering the same information a therapist gathers: your biographical history, your current life situation, your concerns, your desires, your relationships, your fears. Then they were using the dream as a window into your unconscious preoccupations. What you dream about reveals what you're truly concerned with beneath the level of conscious awareness. The ancient text describes a high-status official who dreams constantly of poverty. Beneath his elevated position, beneath his social status, lies deep insecurity about where he came from. The repeated dream is the unconscious mind's way of keeping this anxiety present, unable to ignore it despite his waking efforts to maintain the appearance of nobility. A Greek text describes a priest who dreams repeatedly of breaking sacred laws, of violating the very vows he's taken. The interpretation recognizes this dream as revealing suppressed doubts. On some level, beneath his conscious commitment to his role, his unconscious is questioning his faith, his vows, his dedication. The dream is evidence of internal conflict he hasn't consciously acknowledged. An Indian text describes a warrior who dreams consistently of gentleness, of kindness, of caring for others. The interpretation recognizes this not as weakness, but as revealing his true nature beneath the violent profession he's been forced into. Beneath the warrior's training and the demands of his role lies his actual temperament, compassionate, gentle, unsuited to violence. The dream is the unconscious mind's truth about who he really is beneath the persona he's constructed. What all these examples reveal is that ancient dream interpreters understood the same insight that modern psychology confirms. You cannot interpret a dream without knowing the dreamer. The symbol is just the surface. The person is everything. Every culture on Earth, independently, discovered that people have the same dream over and over. A dream about running from something you can't name. Why would every civilization consider this dream significant? Beyond individual symbols, ancient civilizations recognized something even more fundamental. Recurring dream scenarios that appeared across their entire societies. These weren't random, they were patterns, templates the descent. Traveling downward, often into caves or waters or darkness. Civilizations across the world documented this dream and interpreted it as a journey into the unconscious, a confrontation with deep truths, a necessary descent that must precede ascension. The ascension, climbing, flying, rising. Interpreted as spiritual elevation, gaining perspective, overcoming obstacles, transcendence. The transformation, becoming an animal, changing form, morphing into something other than yourself. Interpreted as integrating different aspects of self or experiencing disorientation and loss of identity. The chase, being pursued, hunted, running from something you can't quite see or name. Interpreted as avoidance, as something in waking life pursuing you that you're refusing to face. The house. Exploring a building, finding new rooms you didn't know existed, discovering secret chambers or hidden spaces. Interpreted as discovering hidden aspects of the self, the expanding landscape of consciousness. The death. Your own death or the death of someone beloved. Interpreted almost never as literal death, but as transformation, as necessary endings, as the completion of one phase before another begins. What's striking is that Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, and Indian texts all describe these same scenarios. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh contains descent dreams as central to the hero's journey. Greek mythology is filled with transformation dreams and shape-shifting. Indian Vedic texts describe ascension dreams as gateways to enlightenment. Chinese Taoist texts describe chase dreams as the soul fleeing from attachments and illusions. These weren't random scenarios that happened to recur. They were recognized as archetypal, as fundamental patterns through which the human mind processes its deepest experiences. The ancients understood that the unconscious mind doesn't just produce random imagery, but operates through patterns, specific narrative templates, recurring scenarios. This suggested something profound, that beneath the surface diversity of individual human lives, beneath the cultural differences separating civilizations, lies a common psychological structure. All humans face growth and transformation. All humans experience fear and pursuit. All humans contain hidden aspects of themselves they haven't integrated. All humans face endings and beginnings. The dream templates were the unconscious mind's way of addressing these universal challenges. The descent takes you into darkness so you can eventually rise transformed. The chase forces you to confront what you're avoiding. The transformation reveals that identity is more fluid than you assumed. The house shows you that you're larger and stranger and more complex than you thought. Far from being primitive, the ancients had identified something that neuroscience is still validating. That human brains process experience through archetypal patterns that appear across cultures and throughout history. The templates aren't cultural inventions. They're the deep structure of how consciousness organizes itself. They appear because we need them. They recur because they address timeless human challenges. They carry meaning because they contain the wisdom of the collective unconscious attempting to guide individual consciousness toward integration and wholeness. An ancient physician diagnoses you with a disease you don't have symptoms of yet. How? By examining your dreams. 3 months later, you become violently ill with exactly what they predicted. This happened regularly enough to become documented medical practice. We're entering territory that challenges the clean division between spirituality and science, between superstition and medical practice. Because what we're about to explore is the ancient use of dreams as diagnosis, medical diagnosis. Using patterns in someone's dreams to identify illness before the body has manifested obvious symptoms. In Egypt, medical texts from the Temple of Dendera document cases of dream diagnosis. A physician would examine a patient's dreams, particularly nightmares or recurring disturbing images. And from these patterns, they would diagnose imbalances in the patient's health. They understood disease in terms of imbalanced humors, an early theory of disease causation that, while not perfectly accurate, was based on careful observation. The physician would listen to describe their dreams, what images recurred, what emotions dominated, what was the dream's overall tone. A patient dreaming constantly of fire, of burning, of heat consuming them from within. The physician would diagnose an excess of heat in the body, a patient dreaming of drowning, of being submerged, of water overwhelming them. The physician would diagnose an excess of water, an imbalance of fluids. Patients dreaming of decay and rot and decomposition. The physician would diagnose illness rooted in putrefaction, in something inside beginning to spoil. Now, the language is different from modern medicine. The mechanism is different, but the underlying insight is profound. The body speaks to the unconscious mind before it speaks to the conscious mind. Your body's distress registers first in the dream realm. Your unconscious mind detects subtle shifts in appetite and in energy, in physical sensations, that your conscious mind hasn't yet registered, and it expresses this knowledge through the symbolic language of dreams. In ancient Greece, the temples of Asclepius served explicitly as healing shrines where sick individuals would sleep, seeking dreams that might guide their healing. Historical records indicate that many reported genuine healing. They would sleep in the temple sick and wake relieved, sometimes completely cured. Modern interpretation suggests this was early psychosomatic medicine. The recognition that the mind affects the body, and that accessing the unconscious through structured dreaming could produce measurable physical change. But it wasn't just faith healing or placebo effect. Though those are real measurable phenomena, it was something more specific. The dream interpreter in the temple would work with the sick person to understand what the unconscious mind was communicating about their condition. The dream might reveal emotional causes of physical illness. A merchant constantly dreaming of drowning, for instance. The ancient Mesopotamian medical texts note such a dreamer experiences anxiety that affects digestion. The stomach, the ancient physician would note, is closely related to emotional states. Anxiety ripples through the digestive system. The dream reveals the emotional root. Treatment can then address both the emotional disturbance and its physical manifestation. A warrior haunted by dreams of mutilation, of his body torn apart, of violence done to his physical form. The ancient Greek physician would recognize this as the psyche expressing trauma. The warrior has experienced violence. His unconscious mind is processing that trauma through nightmares. But here's what's remarkable. The same warriors, when their nightmares are addressed through therapeutic dream work, which the ancients called divine healing, often report that chronic pain conditions that developed after trauma begin to resolve. This is proto-medicine recognizing the mind-body connection that modern Western medicine has largely abandoned. The ancient physician understood that you cannot treat the body without treating the mind. That illness often has psychological roots or psychological components. That dreams reveal information about a person's total health: physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual. The section doesn't claim that ancient dream diagnosis was always accurate or that dreams performed miracles. But it does establish that ancient practitioners recognized something neuroscience now confirms. Stress and psychological states profoundly affect physical health. A person experiencing constant anxiety will develop digestive problems. A person harboring rage will develop inflammation. A person experiencing grief will develop immune suppression. The ancient practitioners didn't understand the neurochemical mechanisms, but they understood the pattern. And they recognized that dreams revealed these patterns before the body had obviously broken down. This was a holistic medicine thousands of years before modern medicine would begin to rediscover this concept. It treated the person as a unified whole: body, mind, emotion, spirit, all interconnected and all affecting each other. The dream was a window into this whole system. The physician who could read the dream could understand the person's total condition. What makes this remarkable is that it worked. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to justify the investment of enormous resources. Temples were built, physicians were trained, people traveled vast distances, all because dreams, when properly interpreted, offered genuine medical insight. An ancient dream interpreter could tell if you were ambitious, deceptive, fearful, or lustful. Not by asking you directly, but by listening to your dreams for a single night. How did they know such personal truths so accurately? This is where ancient dream interpretation becomes something very close to modern psychology. Because what the ancient practitioners recognized was that your dreams reveal your deepest self, the self beneath the social masks, beneath the persona you present to the world, beneath the roles you've adopted. The fundamental insight is simple. You cannot lie to yourself in dreams. Your waking consciousness can construct an image, can pretend, can maintain contradictions. But the unconscious mind doesn't have the same investment in the story. It responds to reality. What you dream about reveals what you truly value, what you truly fear, what you truly desire. Beneath all the social performance, beneath all the constructed identity, the dream shows the actual human being. An Egyptian text describes a high-status official who dreams constantly of poverty. He's successful, wealthy, respected. Yet night after night, he dreams of being poor, of having nothing, of losing everything. The interpretation recognizes this as revealing something the official consciously denies: a deep shame about his origins. Somewhere in his past lies poverty, or a sense of unworthiness despite his current status. The unconscious mind won't let him forget it. The dream insists on acknowledging this shadow side of his identity. A Greek text describes a priest who dreams repeatedly of breaking his sacred vows. He's dedicated his life to his role. He presents as devout, committed, obedient to his spiritual path. Yet his dreams show him violating everything he consciously claims to believe in. The interpretation recognizes this as revealing suppressed doubts. On some level, beneath his conscious commitment, his unconscious is questioning his faith. The dream is evidence of internal conflict he hasn't consciously acknowledged. An Indian text describes a warrior trained from childhood in violence, in combat, in martial strength. He's successful in his role. He's respected for his prowess. Yet he dreams constantly of gentleness, of caring for others, of tending wounds instead of causing them. The interpretation recognizes this as revealing his true nature beneath the violent profession he's been forced into. His unconscious mind is showing him who he really is: compassionate, gentle, unsuited to violence despite his skill. The dream is the truth about his deeper self. Artemidorus, whose work survives from the 2nd century, developed this into an explicit system for understanding character through dreams. Are you ambitious? Your dreams will show it. The ambitious person dreams of ascending, of climbing, of achievement, of gaining status. Are you deceptive? Your dreams will reveal guilt. The deceiver dreams of being exposed, of being caught, of having their hidden nature revealed. Are you harboring forbidden desires? Your dreams will display them. The person whose conscious mind denies lustfulness, greed, anger, or other socially unacceptable impulses will dream these impulses explicitly. This is where the sophistication of ancient practice becomes undeniable. They weren't claiming to read minds through magic. They were making a psychological observation that the unconscious mind operates according to truth, that beneath the conscious story you tell about yourself lies the actual story. And dreams are the primary way this actual story expresses itself. The ancient practitioners understood that this could be used therapeutically. If you could help someone acknowledge what their dreams were revealing about their actual self, they could begin to integrate rather than deny. A person could stop pretending to be someone they're not. A person could acknowledge their actual desires rather than living in constant internal conflict. A person could recognize their actual nature rather than performing a role that contradicts who they really are. This is recognizable as early psychology, recognizing that dreams are a technology for accessing information the waking mind conceals. That what happens in the dream realm reveals truth about the dreamer. That interpretation, when done skillfully with biographical context, can reveal patterns the dreamer themselves might not consciously recognize. The section concludes by positioning this as early psychology, not superstition, a systematic way of understanding the human psyche through its nightly communications. The same insight that Freud would later formalize, that the unconscious mind holds truths about ourselves we consciously deny, was already known to the ancients. They had discovered the same fundamental principle. Consciousness is not unified. There's more to you than what you consciously think you are. And dreams are the primary way this deeper self speaks. Ancient dream interpreters predicted the future with unsettling accuracy. Not because they could see tomorrow, but because they'd learned to read the information your unconscious mind has already gathered. The question that emerges is, how did ancient dream interpreters seem to predict future events? How did they see things before they happened? The answer isn't magic. It's something more interesting and more explicable. Sophisticated pattern recognition through the unconscious mind. Consider this scenario from Babylonian records. An official dreams of the king's death. 3 months later, the king is assassinated. Did the dream reveal magical knowledge of a future event? Or had the official moving through the palace unconsciously perceived conspirators gathering? Had he noticed subtle shifts in allegiances, in who spoke to whom, in whose loyalty was wavering? Had his unconscious mind processed information his conscious mind hadn't registered and expressed this knowledge through the dream? An Egyptian merchant dreams of shipwreck before a voyage. The ship sinks in a storm, exactly as suggested by the dream. Did the dream predict the future? Or had the merchant, observing the vessel, unconsciously noticed structural problems? Weaknesses in the hull, poor maintenance, signs of seaworthiness the conscious mind dismissed? Had his unconscious mind registered danger signals that his conscious mind, driven by commercial necessity, chose to ignore? This is the elegant mechanism that ancient interpreters had discovered. The unconscious mind is constantly processing information. It notices everything. It observes patterns. It reads subtle cues in the environment. It has access to your body's knowledge about its own condition. It remembers everything you've ever experienced. When you deliberately access the unconscious through dreams, you're not accessing supernatural knowledge. You're accessing the intelligence of your whole self, information that exists below conscious awareness. A king dreams of enemies approaching, of siege, of danger to his kingdom. The interpreter reads this as a warning about political instability. Why? Because the king's unconscious mind has likely noticed warning signs that his conscious mind is either ignoring or hasn't consciously processed. A rival growing too powerful, an ally becoming distant, conspirators communicating in ways the conscious mind doesn't quite register. The dream reveals what the unconscious has already gathered. Someone dreams repeatedly of losing teeth. Modern dentists note that this dream often precedes actual dental problems. Why? Because the unconscious mind detects the earliest stages of decay or gum disease that haven't yet become painful or visible. It's registering information at the cellular level that the conscious mind hasn't noticed. This isn't prediction in the mystical sense. It's pattern recognition at the level of the unconscious mind, which is vastly more sophisticated than conscious pattern recognition. The unconscious doesn't apply logic or rationality. It simply detects patterns and expresses them symbolically through dreams. The ancient interpreters called this divine knowledge or prophecy, but the mechanism is psychological. They were demonstrating sophisticated understanding of how consciousness actually works, that we process far more information than we consciously register, and that dreams are where this unconscious processing becomes visible. This explanation, importantly, doesn't require rejecting the ancient findings. The ancients were right that dreams reveal knowledge about the future. They just didn't understand the mechanism. They attributed it to gods. Modern psychology understands it as the unconscious mind's superior pattern recognition. But the practical result is the same. Dreams reveal information you need to know. An ancient man dreams that a god tells him not to sail. He ignores the dream and sails anyway. The ship sinks exactly as predicted. Was he warned by a god, or does his unconscious mind have access to information about storms, ship safety, and timing that his waking mind doesn't? Here we enter the territory of spiritual interpretation of dreams. And here we must be careful not to dismiss what we don't understand with modern materialism. Rather, we should explore it with genuine curiosity. What were the ancients actually experiencing? What were they trying to communicate when they spoke of gods appearing in dreams? Across ancient cultures, gods appeared in dreams with remarkable consistency. In Egypt, Ra might appear as a golden figure, radiant and powerful. In Greece, Athena might appear as a wise woman, or Apollo as a young man of unearthly beauty. In Mesopotamia, Marduk might appear as a figure of overwhelming presence. In India, divine forms would manifest in dreams according to the devotion and spiritual practice of the dreamer. What's striking is that these visions often convey genuine information. A warrior dreams of a god saying, "Do not attack at dawn," and historical records suggest that battles fought against this guidance were lost. A healer dreams of a god revealing a specific plant remedy, and the plant actually heals the described condition. A ruler dreams of a god warning against a particular decision, and that decision, when avoided, proves to have saved the kingdom. Now, there are several ways to interpret this. The first possibility, the gods are real, and they actually do appear to humans in dreams. The second possibility, gods are a cultural and symbolic language for describing the unconscious mind's communication. The third possibility, both descriptions point to the same reality, just using different frameworks. What the ancient peoples were clear about was that something was happening, something real, something that communicated information, offered guidance, produced healing. Whether we call it divine or psychological or both doesn't change the essential fact. The dreamer was accessing wisdom larger than their individual conscious perspective. Consider the structure of such dreams. A god appears, not as a stranger, but as an archetypal figure the dreamer recognizes immediately and intuitively. The god speaks without words, the dreamer understands perfectly. The message is often simple and clear. Do this, avoid that, understand this about yourself. There's no ambiguity about the meaning of the dream. The dreamer wakes with complete certainty about what they've been told. This differs from ordinary dreams, which are often cryptic and require interpretation. The dreams where gods appear are remarkably direct. They communicate as a messenger would, clearly and specifically. Yet, they come from within, from the dreamer's own consciousness. What part of the mind can speak so clearly and with such authority? The answer that Jung and modern psychology offer is the self, the deeper self, the integrated whole of consciousness that includes far more than the conscious ego. The self that is in contact with something larger. Whether we call it the collective unconscious or the divine doesn't matter. What matters is that contact with this deeper self produces guidance, wisdom, and healing. The ancient peoples didn't have this psychological framework. They attributed divine guidance to actual gods, but they were describing the same phenomenon. They were encountering something larger than their individual conscious mind, something wise and powerful, and genuinely helpful. They were accessing wisdom from the depths. What's important to understand is that this wasn't superstition for the ancients. It was exactly as rational as we consider neuroscience today. They were observing phenomena. They were drawing conclusions based on evidence. The dreams came. The guidance proved accurate. The healing manifested. The prophecies materialized. Based on this evidence, they concluded that the divine was speaking to humans through dreams. Were they wrong? Or were they simply using different language to describe something that modern psychology would also validate? That consciousness has depths we don't usually access. That wisdom exists below the level of individual conscious awareness. That dreams are the primary way this deeper wisdom speaks. What seems clear is that something real was happening. Whether we label it divine communication or unconscious wisdom, the result was the same. People had access to information and guidance they needed. The ancients built temples around this access point. They invested enormous resources. They trained practitioners, all because what they found was genuine. Ancient people all reported the same basic dreams from the divine: warnings about moral failure, guidance about hidden decisions, messages about wholeness. Either every god on earth is giving identical advice, or something universal about human consciousness keeps trying to send the same messages. When you examine the messages that ancient peoples reported receiving through dreams, across every civilization and every tradition, a pattern emerges. These weren't random culturally specific revelations. These were recurring themes, addressing the same fundamental human challenges. Messages of warning dominated. In dreams, gods or deeper wisdom communicated warnings about impending danger, moral violation, poor decisions. A pharaoh dreams of a god warning against a particular course of action, and the action avoided proves to have been destructive. A merchant dreams of being warned not to trust a particular business partner, and the partner later proves to be deceptive. A soldier dreams of a god saying, "Do not venture this path," and the path leads to ambush and death. These warnings weren't about random events. They were about choices the dreamer was actively contemplating. The dreamer was already considering the dangerous path, the untrustworthy partner, the destructive action. The dream appeared as a voice of counsel, saying essentially, "I see what you're considering. I see it more clearly than you do. Stop." Messages of guidance were equally consistent. In dreams, the divine communicated which path to take, what action to pursue, what to avoid. A healer dreams of a god revealing a specific treatment method, and the method works. A leader dreams of being shown a diplomatic approach, and the approach brings peace instead of war. An artist dreams of being inspired with a specific vision, and the vision, when realized, becomes a masterpiece. These weren't vague spiritual platitudes. They were specific, practical guidance addressing concrete problems the dreamer faced. Messages of initiation and transformation appeared consistently. The divine communicated that a transition was coming, that the dreamer was ready for something new, that death of the old self was necessary before birth of the new. A young person dreams of being formally initiated by a god, and the dream marks a permanent psychological shift, a before and after in their development. An older person dreams of being prepared for the final journey, and the dream brings acceptance of mortality. Messages of healing and integration formed another consistent category. The divine communicated that emotional wounds needed addressing, that psychological fragmentation could be healed, that wholeness was available. A person dreams of a god revealing the root of their pain, and the revelation brings genuine healing. A person dreams of fragmented parts of themselves being brought together, and the dream precedes integration that changes their entire personality. What emerges across all these messages is a picture of the unconscious mind, or divine consciousness, depending on your perspective, attempting to guide human behavior toward wisdom, morality, integration, and wholeness. Consider the Egyptian message that constantly recurs in dreams: the necessity of moral living. Gods demand righteousness. Moral violation is warned against. The right action is revealed. Why would this message recur? Because humans constantly face temptation to compromise their values. The unconscious mind keeps attempting to remind, integrity matters. Your actions have consequences. Wholeness requires living according to your values. The Greek message that dominates: wisdom and self-knowledge. Gods emphasize understanding yourself. Know yourself becomes the repeated message. Why? Because consciousness tends toward ignorance of itself. We fool ourselves. We live in denial. The unconscious mind keeps insisting. See yourself clearly. Understand what you're actually doing. The Mesopotamian message: balance and proper order. The gods require adherence to cosmic law. Excess must be avoided. Balance must be maintained. Why? Because consciousness tends toward extremes. We overcommit. We lose perspective. We forget that all things must be balanced. Across all these traditions, the messages aren't about predicting unique futures or revealing supernatural knowledge. They're about identifying universal human challenges and suggesting that higher wisdom exists to address them. They're saying, you face temptation, choose integrity. You face confusion, seek understanding. You face chaos, maintain balance. Every human faces these challenges. The dreams aren't unique prophecies, but rather universal wisdom being delivered to individuals. The gods are saying, these challenges are perennial. This wisdom about how to meet them is available. Will you listen? Some ancient cultures required dreams as part of becoming a spiritual leader. The person who emerged from the dream ritual was not the same person who entered it. Something fundamental had changed. What happens in dreams that could alter a human being so profoundly? Dreams weren't merely communication in ancient mystery religions. They were transformation. In ancient Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and India, initiation systems incorporated controlled dreaming experiences as central to the initiate's development. These weren't hallucinations induced by drugs, though some traditions may have involved plant medicines. These were profound psychological experiences accessed through sleep, ritual preparation, and intention. The structure was always similar. The initiate would prepare through purification, study, and meditation. Then they would sleep in a sacred space. During sleep, significant dreams would come. Upon waking, these dreams would be interpreted in the context of their spiritual development. The dreams would mark transitions from ignorance to understanding, from fragmentation to integration, from the profane to the sacred. What's remarkable is that initiates reported permanent psychological transformation following these dream experiences. They spoke of before and after the initiation. Before, they had been incomplete, partial, identified with limited aspects of themselves. After, they had experienced something that fundamentally reorganized their consciousness. Rather than calling this mystical, we can understand it as early psychology working at its deepest level, using dreams to access and restructure fundamental beliefs and patterns. The dreams weren't generating information from outside the person. They were bringing to consciousness things the person had repressed or denied or fragmented. The hero's journey archetype, documented in mythology across cultures, mirrors the structure of initiation dreams. The hero receives a call to adventure, descent into the unknown. In dreams, the initiate descends into darkness, into the unconscious. The hero encounters the enemy or shadow. What's blocking transformation? In dreams, the initiate encounters disowned parts of themselves, the aspects they've rejected. The hero undergoes transformation, death and rebirth. In dreams, the initiate's old identity dissolves. The hero returns transformed, ascends with new wisdom. In dreams, the initiate awakens with new integration. This journey, the ancient practitioners understood, is the structure of genuine psychological development. You cannot move toward wholeness without descending into darkness. You cannot integrate without encountering shadow. You cannot be reborn without the old self dying. You cannot gain wisdom without confronting fear. The dream was the technology for facilitating this journey. By entering sleep with intention, the dreamer created space for the unconscious to do its work. The dream would naturally take the form of the hero's journey. Descent, encounter, transformation, ascent. Because this is the structure consciousness uses to reorganize itself. Ancient practitioners positioned dreams not just as communication from the divine, but as mechanisms through which the divine reshapes the human being. The gods weren't just speaking messages, they were using dreams as tools for transformation. The dream experience was the god working within the dreamer, restructuring consciousness from fragmented toward integrated. This explains why these cultures invested such profound resources in initiation systems built around dreams. They understood that dreams were perhaps the most powerful technology available for genuine human transformation. Not entertainment, not divination for prediction, but actual change at the deepest level of consciousness. Egypt created a 3,000-year-old database of dreams and what actually happened to the people who had them. The patterns were so consistent they became medical practice. We still have the records. They were right more often than probability would predict. Of all the ancient civilizations we're exploring, Egypt developed the most systematic, documented approach to dreams. While other cultures created spiritual systems and philosophical frameworks, Egypt created institutions, records, and methodologies that we can still examine today. This is dream science at its most institutionalized. The Temple of Dendera housed dream practitioners. The temples of Asclepius throughout Egypt served as dream healing centers. But most significantly, Egyptians recorded thousands of dreams and their interpretations on papyri, creating what we might call the world's first systematic database of dreams and outcomes. They didn't just interpret dreams and move on. They tracked the outcomes. They recorded whether their interpretation proved accurate. They revised their understanding based on evidence. This was scientific methodology applied to dreams, centuries before anyone used that term. Observe the phenomenon. Record the data. Notice patterns. Refine understanding. Test predictions. Revise as needed. The Egyptian understanding of dreams was categorized. Prophetic dreams revealed futures. Diagnostic dreams revealed health or psychological states. Moral dreams revealed ethical issues. Guidance dreams offered instruction. But crucially, Egyptians understood that not all dreams were meaningful. They distinguished between dream nightly thoughts, random neural activity, and true dream. Significant communication carrying real information. This discrimination shows sophisticated observation. Modern sleep science would confirm that most dreams are indeed relatively meaningless. But certain dreams stand out. They are more vivid, more emotionally intense, more narratively coherent, more memorable. These are the dreams that matter. The Egyptian practitioners had identified this empirically without any modern scientific framework. The Chester Beatty papyrus, which survives from ancient Egypt, contains a collection of dreams and their interpretations. By examining this text, we see the Egyptian system at work. Dreams of ascending, positive interpretations. The dreamer is gaining status, achieving success, experiencing spiritual elevation. Dreams of descending ambiguous. The dreamer is exploring the unconscious, gaining self-knowledge, but also potentially losing status or confronting shadow. Dreams of water, prosperous. Water suggests emotional flow, financial fluidity, transformation. Dreams of fire, warnings. Fire indicates purification but also danger, transformation but also destruction. What strikes us reading these texts is the consistency. The same symbols recur. The same interpretations are applied. But more importantly, we see the practitioners weren't guessing. They were systematizing observations. Each interpretation is based on patterns they'd observed. Each symbol connection is derived from accumulated experience. For example, when the Egyptians consistently interpreted water as money, this wasn't arbitrary. They had noticed that people who dreamed of clear flowing water often experienced financial improvements. They had noticed that people who dreamed of stagnant water often experienced financial stagnation. They had tracked these patterns across hundreds of cases and found enough correlation to establish it as a reliable symbol. The Egyptian approach included psychological sophistication that we should not underestimate. The practitioners understood that context matters. They would conduct what amounts to a psychological interview before interpreting. Who are you? What is your role in society? What challenges are you facing? What do you desire? They were gathering the biographical and psychological context necessary for accurate interpretation. The practitioners also understood personality. They could read character from dream patterns. Is the dreamer ambitious? Their dreams will reflect it. Is the dreamer anxious? Their dreams will show it. Is the dreamer dealing with guilt or shame? Their dreams will display it. They had developed what we might now call a dream personality profile, understanding that the habitual content of someone's dreams reveals something essential about who they are. The section emphasizes that Egyptian practitioners weren't guessing. They were systematizing observations. They tracked dreams over years and decades, noting which interpretations correlated with actual outcomes. This was scientific methodology applied to dreams. The dream temples weren't mystical retreats, but rather research centers. What's remarkable is that this system worked. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to justify institutional investment, enough to create a knowledge base that persisted for thousands of years, enough to produce results that made people believe it was worth traveling vast distance to access. Egypt, more than any other ancient civilization, took dreams seriously at an institutional level, built institutions around them, trained practitioners, documented their work, revised their understanding based on outcomes, created a knowledge system that persisted because it worked. This is what ancient dream science looked like when a civilization took it as seriously as we now take medicine or psychology. Not with instruments or laboratory conditions, but with systematic observation, careful record-keeping, and continuous refinement of understanding based on evidence. An Egyptian dream interpreter could tell whether to comfort or warn a dreamer based on 1 hour of conversation about their life. They weren't making guesses. They were performing psychological assessment 2,500 years before psychology had a name. The Egyptian understanding of dream interpretation requires knowing the dreamer. This was not a minor insight. It was the foundation of their entire system. An identical dream meant something completely different for a servant, a merchant, a soldier, or a priest. The symbol was the same. The meaning was completely personal. Why? Because dreams don't exist in a vacuum. They emerge from a specific life situation, a specific psychological state, a specific set of current challenges and concerns. The same symbol must be interpreted through the lens of the specific person having the dream. Ascension in a dream, climbing, flying, rising, generally means success and progress. But for someone already at high status, ascending means something different than for someone at low status. A pharaoh ascending his throne means his power is strengthening. A slave ascending a ladder means dangerous hope that could lead to rebellion or death. The symbol is the same. The context changes the meaning entirely. Danger in a dream, being chased, being threatened, being attacked, generally indicates something threatening in waking life. But for a warrior, danger in dreams means something different than for a merchant. The warrior is accustomed to literal danger. A dream of danger might indicate something psychologically dangerous rather than physical. The merchant, unfamiliar with combat, a dream of danger might indicate literal threat to his business or safety. Abundance in a dream, wealth, feast, harvest, generally indicates prosperity. But for someone already wealthy, such dreams might indicate greed or fear of loss. For someone poor, such dreams might indicate hope or anxiety about meeting basic needs. The symbol points to abundance. The meaning depends on the dreamer's actual circumstances. The Egyptian practitioners understood this implicitly. They would ask, "Who is dreaming? What is your role in society? What are you currently facing? What do you fear? What do you hope for?" They were conducting what a modern therapist would recognize as a biographical and psychological intake. They were gathering the information necessary to interpret accurately. Egyptian texts document specific example of this contextual interpretation. A pharaoh dreams of his throne being empty. The interpretation, his power is being questioned. Threats to his authority require his attention. The empty throne means his position is at risk. A common worker dreams of his simple home being empty. The interpretation, he will lose his modest security. Homelessness approaches. His simple home represents everything he has. Its emptiness predicts losing that security. Same symbol, an empty space the dreamer identifies with. Completely different interpretations, based on who the dreamer is and what's at stake for them. A pharaoh's throne has different meaning than a laborer's home. Losing them threatens different things. This framework is essentially what modern psychology calls assessment. You cannot understand a dream without understanding the dreamer. The dream is always personally meaningful. Its meaning emerges from the intersection of the universal symbol and the specific life situation. The Egyptian approach presents evidence that ancient Egyptians weren't engaging in arbitrary symbolism. They weren't applying mechanical rules. If you dream of water, it means money, period. They were engaging in sophisticated contextual analysis. They understood that the same image means different things to different people. They recognized that interpretation requires knowledge of the person. This is proto-Freudian psychology. It recognizes that the unconscious mind speaks to the whole person. The person's life situation, their status, their concerns, their fears, their hopes, all of this shapes what the dream means. The dream isn't delivering a universal message. It's delivering a personally meaningful message shaped by the dreamer's context. What emerges is a picture of ancient Egyptians functioning as early psychotherapists, not with the terminology or theoretical frameworks of modern therapy, but with the core insight. Understanding a person requires understanding their whole situation. Dreams are a window into that situation. Interpretation requires biographical context. Egyptian dream interpreters had identified exactly what every symbol in your dreams means, not metaphorically, but consistently, systematically across thousands of recorded dreams. Their interpretations look suspiciously accurate. The Egyptians developed what amounts to a psychological dictionary, a system of dream symbols and their meanings. Importantly, they didn't believe these symbols were arbitrary cultural inventions. They believed they had discovered something real about how the unconscious mind communicates. They had mapped its language: water, emotional states, the unconscious mind, profit, purification. The meaning depended on context. Water flowing peacefully suggested emotional fluidity and positive financial flow. Murky water suggested unclear emotions and the mysterious depths of the psyche. Drowning suggested emotional overwhelm. Water rising from the ground suggested emotional emergence. But across all variations, water was the symbol for emotion and the unconscious. Fire, divine presence, transformation, danger, purification. Again, context determined the specific meaning. Fire from heaven suggested divine favor. Fire consuming suggested danger or necessary destruction. Fire illuminating suggested truth revealed. Fire spreading suggested loss of control. But fire consistently indicated transformation and the divine. Animals. Qualities associated with those animals. The lion meant courage or ferocity. The serpent meant wisdom or danger. The bird meant elevation or freedom. The elephant meant strength and authority. Rather than arbitrary, these associations flowed from the natural qualities of the animals themselves. Buildings, the self or aspects of self. A house meant the person's psyche. Different rooms meant different aspects. Finding new rooms meant discovering hidden aspects of oneself. The house's condition reflected the dreamer's psychological state. A crumbling house meant deteriorating psychological coherence. A well-maintained house meant psychological integration. Ascending, success, spiritual elevation, overcoming obstacles. Moving upward in any form, climbing, flying, rising, indicated progress and achievement. The height achieved indicated the magnitude of success. Ascending easily meant smooth progress. Ascending with difficulty meant obstacles to overcome. Descending, self-examination, confronting shadow, loss of status. Moving downward indicated descent into the unconscious, necessary for psychological development, but also potentially dangerous. Descending toward darkness meant confronting hidden truths. Descending willingly meant accepting necessary psychological work. Falling indicated unexpected or loss of status. Death, transformation. Ending, new beginning. Rarely literal death, usually the death of the old self. Death in dreams preceded major life transitions. Dreaming of your own death often preceded profound psychological change. The dream prepared the dreamer for transformation. What's striking is how consistently these symbols appear across Egyptian texts. More striking still is how these same symbols appear in Greek, Mesopotamian, Indian, and Chinese traditions. The symbols aren't arbitrary cultural inventions. They're universal, reflecting how human consciousness actually works when it accesses the unconscious through dreams. Jung would later propose that these are archetypes, universal patterns emerging from the collective unconscious. But the Egyptians hadn't needed this terminology. They had simply observed that certain symbols recurred, that they reliably carried certain meanings, that this pattern was consistent across their civilization. The Egyptian dream dictionary wasn't a rigid system where one image always meant one thing. It was a flexible framework that required interpretation, but it was based on patterns they had observed and documented. They had tracked these patterns across thousands of dreams. They had noticed which interpretations correlated with actual outcomes. The conclusion is that the Egyptians had mapped genuine territory, not the territory of the external future, but the territory of the unconscious mind itself. The structure of how it communicates, the symbolic language it naturally uses, the patterns through which consciousness organizes itself. A Mesopotamian general dreams of defeat. He cancels the battle. The historical records show that on that day, the enemy army was indeed positioned to destroy him. Did the dream predict, or did the general's unconscious mind read the situation? While Egypt was building temples and creating databases, Mesopotamia was developing a different approach to dreams, more practical, more focused on immediate application. Where Egypt emphasized spiritual transformation and institutional knowledge, Mesopotamia emphasized practical efficiency. Dreams as business intelligence, dreams as military strategy, dreams as health diagnosis, dreams as tools for navigating life. The Babylonian texts reveal this pragmatic focus. A merchant dreams of water, interpretation. Prepare for financial changes. A general dreams of battle, interpretation, and expect actual conflict. A healer dreams of specific herbs. Interpretation, test those herbs immediately. Mesopotamian dream interpretation was less spiritual than Egyptian, more focused on extracting actionable information from the dream. What does this dream tell me about what I should do? Historical records document that this approach worked. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar's dreams profoundly affected military and religious policy. The king would dream something, and based on the dream's message, he would modify his approach. The narrative doesn't claim that dreams made the decisions for the king. Rather, dreams were treated as valuable input for decision-making, acknowledged as a channel that accessed information beyond conscious awareness. The Mesopotamians understood something about dreams that modern business would benefit from. They carry information your conscious, rational mind hasn't processed yet. A general's unconscious mind, moving through the military camp, noting the positions of troops, observing the morale of soldiers, sensing the coordination of the enemy. The general's unconscious mind has been reading the military situation constantly. When the general dreams of defeat, it's not prophecy. It's the accumulated unconscious knowledge being expressed. The general's deep mind has noticed warning signs the conscious mind hasn't consciously registered. This is sophisticated pattern recognition at the level of the unconscious. And the Mesopotamians understood it practically. If you're getting strong warnings in your dreams, pay attention. Your deeper self might see something important. The Mesopotamian approach also included careful attention to nightmares and bad dreams. They didn't dismiss these as meaningless. They understood them as the psyche attempting to warn about danger or imbalance. A nightmare isn't your mind being randomly cruel. It's your mind urgently trying to get your attention about something. Nightmares mean something in your life needs attention. Either a genuine external threat or an internal psychological issue that's being ignored. This is sophisticated psychological observation. If you're having nightmares regularly, something is wrong. Pay attention, address it. Don't dismiss the fear as irrational. The fear comes from somewhere. Your unconscious mind is detecting something your conscious mind is ignoring. The Mesopotamian approach complemented rather than contradicted Egypt's. Where Egypt emphasized spiritual transformation through dreams, Mesopotamia emphasized practical application. Where Egypt built institutions around dreams, Mesopotamia focused on individual utility. But both recognize the same fundamental truth. Dreams carry real information that can be acted upon. The section establishes that Mesopotamian approach wasn't less sophisticated than Egyptian, just different. Egypt asked, what is this dream revealing about the person's soul and spiritual development? Mesopotamia asked, what is this dream telling me I should do? Both questions had valid answers. Both approaches produce results. The Mesopotamian texts also reveal an understanding of the relationship between dreams and waking life. What you're dealing with in waking life will show up in dreams. What you're avoiding will be highlighted in nightmares. What you need to understand will be shown symbolically in your dreams. There's no escape from this. The unconscious mind keeps broadcasting information about your actual situation. You can ignore it, but it keeps transmitting. Ancient Greek philosophers asked, if consciousness is divided in sleep, which version of you is real? The person having the dream, or the person who remembers it? This question points to something about consciousness that we're still puzzling over. While Egypt was building institutions and Mesopotamia was focusing on practical application, Greece was doing something different. Greece was asking the philosophical question, what does dreaming tell us about the nature of consciousness itself? Greek philosophers approached dreams as a philosophical problem. Aristotle theorized that dreams were the mind's way of processing experience. The brain continues to work during sleep, he suggested, reflecting on the day's events, consolidating memories, processing emotions. Aristotle wasn't claiming dreams carried supernatural information. He was trying to understand them as a psychological phenomenon. What was the brain doing when it dreamed? But this rational philosophical approach coexisted with something else in Greece. The mystery religions. Initiation systems like Eleusis, Incorporated, controlled dream experiences as central to spiritual development. Initiates would undergo preparation, purification, and ritual, then sleep in the sacred chamber. In that liminal space, profound dreams would come. Dreams that produced genuine psychological transformation. The paradox the Greeks were living with, and it's a paradox modern consciousness studies still struggles with, is that dreams seem to operate according to two different logics. The rational logic that Aristotle was trying to map. Dreams process experience, consolidate memory, reflect on daily concerns. This explained many dreams. But it didn't explain the transformative dreams, the ones that seemed to come from a deeper level, that carried genuine wisdom, that changed the person who had them. The Greek practitioners developed something remarkable, a systematic approach to dream interpretation that incorporated both the rational and the mysterious. Artemidorus, the most famous surviving Greek dream interpreter, created a classification of dreams. Straightforward dreams, relatively transparent representations of waking concerns. symbolic dreams, requiring interpretation, expressing meaning through metaphor and symbol. For symbolic dreams, Artemidorus developed methods of interpretation. Consider the dreamer's life. What is their occupation, their status, their current circumstances? Consider the symbol's associations. What does this image naturally suggest? Consider the emotional tone. What does the dream's feeling tell you? Consider predictive categories. Is this a medical dream? A financial dream? A relational dream? This framework combined rational analysis with symbolic interpretation. It was trying to map the dream territory systematically, using reason and observation rather than mysticism. This was the birth of dream psychology, applying systematic investigation to something that had previously been mostly spiritual. The Greeks understood something that became foundational. Dreams are meaningful. Not all of them, but the significant ones carry information. They're not random noise. They're communications from the deeper self. And these communications can be understood through careful analysis. The Greek achievement was philosophical, recognizing that dreams revealed something important about consciousness and reality. The question which version of you is real points to something profound. In waking life, you're one version of yourself. In dreams, you're another. Are both real? How can you be divided? What does this suggest about the nature of consciousness? These questions would occupy philosophers for centuries. But the Greeks had identified something important. Consciousness isn't unified. It divides in sleep. Different aspects of yourself become prominent in dreams. Different types of knowledge are available in dreams. Different wisdom speaks in dreams. Rather than dismissing this as irrelevant to reality, the Greeks took it seriously. They created philosophical frameworks and practical systems for engaging with it. They studied dreams. They interpreted them. They incorporated them into initiation systems. They recognized that dreams were a territory worth exploring. Ancient India described a cosmology where consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Waking, dreaming, sleeping, transcendent. They describe the same mechanisms neuroscience is only now discovering about consciousness itself. While the West was developing institutional structures and philosophical analysis, the East was developing comprehensive cosmological frameworks that positioned dreams not at the margins, but at the center of understanding consciousness and reality. The Indian Vedic tradition understood consciousness as operating at multiple levels simultaneously. Waking consciousness, the state you're in now, operating through the rational mind focused on the external world. Dreaming consciousness, the state you enter in sleep, where the rational mind quiets and the symbolic mind activates. Deep sleep consciousness, the state of undifferentiated awareness, the source from which dreams emerge. Transcendent consciousness, the state beyond ordinary consciousness that can be accessed through spiritual practice, meditation, and sometimes through dreams. These weren't metaphorical states. The Upanishads discuss them as real dimensions of experience that consciousness actually inhabits. Dreams weren't peripheral to this cosmology. They were central. Dreaming consciousness was recognized as a valid mode of experiencing reality, not inferior to waking consciousness, but different from it. What the dreaming mind knows, the waking mind may not know, and vice versa. The Indian understanding was that all four states are real. You exist in all of them. The self is larger than waking consciousness. Understanding yourself requires understanding all the states of consciousness you inhabit. Dreams aren't escapes from reality. They're other dimensions of reality that you're always inhabiting, whether you're aware of it or not. China developed a different but complementary framework. The Taoist tradition understood dreams as arising from qi imbalance, emotional stagnation, or communication from ancestors and spirits. But crucially, China developed practical techniques for working with dreams. Lucid dreaming practices, dream modification techniques, methods for using dreams for healing and spiritual development. The Chinese approach was technological. Here are the methods for accessing and working with dreams. Here is how to become aware within dreams. Here is how to direct and guide them. These weren't just theoretical frameworks, they were practical systems. You could study them. You could practice them. You could develop skill. Like any technology, dream work could be learned and refined. The section presents the stunning fact that Indian texts describing different levels of consciousness and Eastern practices for accessing and working with dreams predate modern psychology by thousands of years, yet describe mechanisms that modern consciousness research is only now beginning to validate. When neuroscience measures brain states during different types of consciousness, they find patterns that map remarkably onto the Indian framework of waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and transcendent consciousness. The Eastern systems developed comprehensive worldviews in which dreams held central importance, not because of superstition, but because they genuinely understood consciousness to be more complex than the waking state alone could capture. All these systems, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, Indian, Chinese, point to a unified recognition. Dreams are not anomalies, they're not glitches in the system, they're fundamental to how consciousness actually functions. Different cultures emphasize different aspects. Egypt emphasized spiritual transformation. Mesopotamia emphasized practical application. Greece emphasized philosophical understanding. India emphasized cosmological framework. China emphasized practical techniques. But together they constitute a global recognition. Dreams matter. They're worth understanding. They're worth engaging with. For thousands of years, every culture on Earth took dreams seriously as carriers of real information. Then, in about 200 years, one culture decided dreams were meaningless noise. Now we're spending billions researching what ancients already knew. Something profound happened during the Enlightenment and the rise of mechanistic science. Dreams, which had been treated as meaningful communications for thousands of years, were suddenly reframed as merely neural noise. Random firing in the sleeping brain, meaningless psychological byproducts, evolutionary mechanisms useful perhaps for memory consolidation or threat simulation, but certainly not vehicles for genuine communication or wisdom. The shift wasn't sudden, it was gradual. As scientific materialism became the dominant worldview, dreams had to be reclassified. Because in a materialist framework, one that recognizes only physical matter as real, where could dreams possibly fit? They aren't physical objects, they can't be measured precisely. They resist control and reproducibility. They refuse to explain themselves according to rational, materialist principles. They're subjective, they're ephemeral, they're irrational. The scientific method as it developed was designed to study physical phenomena, objects you could observe, measure, quantify, control. But dreams resist quantification. They're subjective experiences. Their meaning is personal. They can't be replicated precisely. Two people rarely have identical dreams. You can't force yourself to dream something. You can't control what appears. So the scientific establishment had a choice. Either expand the BE framework to include phenomena that couldn't be quantified and weren't purely physical, or dismiss dreams as not worth serious study. Modern science largely chose the latter. Dreams were shelved, dismissed as superstition, relegated to folklore and psychology, which itself was struggling for scientific legitimacy. The Cartesian split, the philosophical separation of mind and body, was particularly damaging to dream study. If consciousness is fundamentally separate from the physical body, how could mere dreams, which emerge from the physical brain, be valid knowledge? They couldn't be. Dreams were dismissed as the body interfering with the pure mind. Noise in the system, not worth attention. The medical and psychological professions, as they professionalized, adopted this dismissive stance. Dreams became relegated to superstition. Universities stopped teaching dream interpretation. The knowledge accumulated over thousands of years was simply abandoned as outdated and irrational. A person trained in modern medicine in the 1800s learned nothing about dream diagnosis. A psychologist trained in the modern tradition learned to be skeptical of dreams. The entire apparatus of ancient wisdom was dismantled. The irony is profound. At the exact moment modern psychology was being born, in the late 1800s, when researchers were beginning to create new frameworks for understanding the human mind, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of dream study was being discarded. When Freud began to investigate dreams and proposed that they contained psychological significance, he was treated as revolutionary. But he was actually rediscovering what every ancient civilization had known. The narrative treats this as a tragic loss, not just historical curiosity, but a genuine loss of knowledge that had real practical value. For thousands of years, humans had developed a sophisticated technology for understanding themselves, for accessing unconscious wisdom, for diagnosing illness, for facilitating psychological transformation. That technology was abandoned not because it had been proven ineffective, but because it didn't fit the dominant intellectual framework of the time. Modern science had created what we might call a blind spot regarding dreams. It decided they weren't worth studying, weren't worth taking seriously. So for 200 years, Western culture operated with this blindness. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, particularly traditional Eastern cultures that hadn't fully adopted Western rationalism, continued to work with dreams, to develop dream practices, to honor the knowledge ancients had accumulated. The section concludes by establishing the intellectual context for why modern culture needed to relearn what ancients knew. The materialist worldview made dream study impossible within its framework. To seriously study dreams, you had to step outside pure materialism and acknowledge that subjective, non-quantifiable phenomena could carry real information. You had to expand your understanding of what counts as knowledge. You had to recognize that the rational mind isn't the only valid form of intelligence. Freud spent decades developing his theory of dreams. Then Jung spent decades developing his theory. Both arrived at conclusions that perfectly matched what ancient Egyptians had documented 3,000 years earlier. The question is, did they rediscover, or did they simply reinvent what had been forgotten? In the late 1800s, Sigmund Freud began investigating dreams systematically. He treated them as meaningful communications from the unconscious mind. He developed a theory. Dreams were expressions of unconscious desires, particularly sexual and aggressive impulses that consciousness censored. These desires weren't expressed directly in dreams but symbolically, disguised through the dream's symbolism. Now, Freud was wrong about many things. His specific theories about sexual origins of all neurosis was overstated. His interpretation method was sometimes arbitrary, but he was fundamentally correct about one thing. Dreams carry significant information about the psyche. They weren't meaningless noise. They weren't random firing. They were meaningful communications from unconscious parts of the mind expressing concerns the conscious mind denied or suppressed. Freud's framework, that dreams express unconscious desires symbolically, closely paralleled ancient interpretations. Though Freud was largely unaware of this history, the ancients had said the same thing in different language. Dreams express what's in the unconscious through symbol. The ancients had recognized that interpretation requires understanding the dreamer. The ancients had understood that what you dream about reveals hidden truths about yourself. Carl Jung's subsequent work moved even closer to ancient understanding. Jung proposed archetypes, universal symbols emerging from what he called the collective unconscious. These weren't unique to individuals or cultures. They were universal patterns in human consciousness itself. Here's where it becomes startling. Jung's proposed archetypes map almost perfectly onto the ancient dream symbols. The wise old man appears across cultures in dreams and mythology. The shadow, the rejected, repressed aspects of self. The anima and animus, the female and male aspects of consciousness. The self, the integrated whole. All of these appear in ancient dream texts. Jung didn't invent these, he rediscovered them. He found them recurring in modern people's dreams and in mythologies across cultures. He was identifying patterns that ancients had already documented. Modern neuroscience brought a third dimension to dream study, the discovery of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where most vivid dreaming occurs, the identification of neurochemical changes during dreaming, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical analysis, decreasing activity, while the limbic system, emotional and memory centers, increases activity. Brain imaging revealing which areas activate during dreams. The remarkable convergence is this. Modern science is validating what ancients and early modern psychology had concluded using completely different methods. Ancients used observation and documentation. Freud used clinical analysis. Jung used comparative mythology and patient analysis. Modern neuroscience uses brain imaging and chemical analysis. All of these different approaches are converging on the same conclusions. Dreams involve the unconscious mind. They carry information. They use symbolism. They reveal character and tendency. They can facilitate psychological transformation. The mechanism is different in each framework's description, but the essential findings are identical. Modern psychology and neuroscience aren't disproving ancient understanding. They're confirming it. Using different methods, speaking different languages, but arriving at compatible conclusions. The section positions modern psychology not as refuting ancients, but as gradually confirming them through different methodology. This represents not the superiority of modern science, but rather the convergence of different frameworks describing the same reality. Science and ancient wisdom aren't fundamentally in conflict. They're different ways of investigating the same phenomena. When both point in the same direction, the evidence becomes particularly strong. When your brain enters REM sleep, logic shuts down and emotion takes over. Simultaneously, your brain starts weaving the day's experiences and your unconscious preoccupations into symbolic narratives. The ancients didn't know about REM sleep, but they perfectly described what happens during it. Modern neuroscience reveals the mechanism of dreaming. During REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming occurs, something specific happens in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical analysis, fact-checking, rational evaluation, shows decreased activity. Simultaneously, the limbic system, the emotional and memory centers, shows increased activity. The amygdala, which processes emotion, is highly active. The hippocampus, which consolidates memories, is highly active. This neurochemical state explains everything the ancients observed about dreams. Why dreams are emotional rather than logical. Why they use symbol rather than direct language. Why they're associative rather than sequential. Why they're subjective and personal rather than objective and universal. Because during REM sleep, the parts of your brain responsible for logic and objectivity are offline. The parts responsible for emotion, memory, and symbol processing are heightened. What's happening is that your brain is processing information without the constraints of logic and rationality. Your brain is taking the day's experiences, your memories, your current preoccupations, and weaving them into narratives, symbolic stories that express emotional truth more accurately than logical language could. Modern research confirms that dreams process recent experiences. They consolidate memories. They work through emotional content. Dreams appear to be the brain's primary mechanism for integrating new experiences into existing knowledge, for moving information from short-term memory into long-term storage, for processing emotional experiences so they don't remain traumatic. The narrative also examines how modern research validates ancient practices. That dreams reveal emotional states, because the limbic system is the dominant brain system during dreams. That symbols are how the unconscious processes information, because symbolic processing dominates during REM sleep. That interpretation requires understanding the dreamer's life context, because your brain draws on your specific memories, your specific preoccupations, your specific life situation when generating dreams. What ancients called the gods speaking, or divine communication, modern neuroscience understands as the unconscious mind communicating. The mechanism is different in description, but the same in function. The unconscious mind, the parts of your brain that operate outside conscious awareness, is processing information, accessing memories, recognizing patterns, and attempting to communicate through the symbolic language of dreams. The section presents the stunning realization that ancients weren't wrong. They simply used different language to describe mechanisms neuroscience is now validating. When the ancients said, "The God revealed knowledge to me in a dream," they were describing what modern science would call the unconscious mind providing information through symbolic communication. The description is different. The actual phenomenon is identical. This represents not the superiority of modern science, but the convergence of different frameworks describing the same reality. Ancient wisdom and modern science aren't in conflict. They're complementary. One describes experience from the inside. One describes mechanism from the outside. Both point toward the same truth. Most people believe they don't dream. They do. 8 times per night. They've just trained themselves not to remember. In 1 week of intention and attention, you can retrieve access to communications your unconscious mind has been trying to send for your entire life. We transition now from historical and scientific understanding to practical application. Everything we've explored, the ancient systems, the modern science, the mechanisms of consciousness, none of it matters if you can't actually engage with your own dreams. So we begin with the most fundamental step, remembering them. This is where ancient practice and modern neuroscience align perfectly. The ancients knew something that modern sleep science now explains. Dreams are ephemeral. They fade. The moment you wake, the neurochemical state of your brain begins to shift. As the prefrontal cortex reactivates, as logical thinking reasserts itself, the dream memory becomes fragile. Within minutes, you can lose most of the dream. Within hours, only fragments remain. Everyone dreams. Sleep research confirms this absolutely. Most people experience 4 to 6 complete sleep cycles each night. And most cycles include a significant period of REM sleep where vivid dreaming occurs. You're dreaming multiple times every night, whether you consciously remember or not. The problem isn't that you're not dreaming. It's that your waking consciousness isn't capturing the dream before it fades. Your unconscious mind is communicating constantly. But your conscious mind has trained itself not to notice. You've become deaf to the nightly messages. The ancient dream temples addressed this through ritual and structure. The person would sleep in a sacred space, setting intention before sleep. Upon waking, they would lie still, maintaining the dream state mentally before moving. They would recount the dream immediately. Often the dream would be discussed and interpreted with witnesses while still fresh. The entire structure was designed to preserve dream memory. Modern sleep science explains why this works. Lying still upon waking maintains the neurochemical state of sleep a bit longer. The dream memory, still fragile, is processed while the brain is still in a dream-compatible state. Recounting it immediately moves it from short-term memory into verbal formulation, making it more permanent. Discussing it with others deepens encoding. All of this makes sense neurologically. Here are the practical steps to remember dreams. First, set intention before sleep. Not in a mystical sense. Simply consciously decide, I'm going to remember my dreams tonight. The conscious mind is attentive to intention. It primes attention in ways that improve encoding. Second, keep paper beside your bed. The moment you wake, if you remember anything about a dream, an image, an emotion, a fragment of narrative, write it down immediately. Don't get out of bed. Don't move around. Don't check your phone. Stay in the sleep-like state as long as possible while capturing what you remember. Third, stay still for a few minutes after waking. Let the dream fade gradually rather than snapping awake and plunging into waking consciousness. The few minutes of stillness, of holding on to the dream's emotional tone and general narrative, preserves more memory than rushing into the day. Fourth, review the dreams immediately and within an hour. The first review preserves initial memory. The second review, within an hour, stabilizes it further. Both reviews move the dream from short-term to longer-term memory. Most people find that within a week of this practice, their dream recall improves dramatically. They discover they're dreaming every night. They discover their dreams are far more vivid, narratively complex and emotionally charged than they'd remembered. They discover their dreams often address current concerns, worries they're consciously aware of, or anxieties they haven't consciously registered. The section emphasizes that dream recall isn't mystical ability, it's skill development. Your unconscious mind is always communicating. Your conscious mind can learn to listen. With attention and intention, you can retrieve access to information that's been trying to reach you. What most people discover through regular dream journaling is that their dreams aren't random. They address real concerns, they provide perspective on current challenges. They offer insight into patterns and habits and emotions the waking mind hasn't fully processed. Dreams aren't escapes from reality. They're another lens on reality, the lens of the whole self, not just the conscious perspective. An ancient dream interpreter could listen to your dream for 5 minutes and tell you something true about yourself that you'd been unconsciously avoiding. The secret wasn't mystical. They had learned to recognize what the unconscious mind communicates through symbol. Now that you're remembering dreams, the question becomes, what are they saying? This requires learning to read the language of symbols, metaphors, and narrative that the unconscious mind speaks. Importantly, dream symbols are personally meaningful. The same symbol can mean different things to different people. Your personal associations, your life experiences, your current situation, all of this shapes what a symbol means to you. A dream interpreter working with you needs to understand you, not just apply a universal symbol dictionary. But there are patterns. Certain symbols carry similar meaning across people and cultures. And there's a systematic framework for interpretation that works. Start with emotion. This is the most reliable guide. What did you feel in the dream? Fear, joy, confusion, sadness, desire. The emotional tone is often clearer than the content. A dream that feels frightening is showing you something you're afraid of. A dream that feels liberating is showing you something you're yearning for. Trust the emotion more than the literal content. Second, notice the narrative arc. What happens? What's the progression? Does the dream move toward resolution or remain unresolved? Are you active or passive? Does the situation escalate or de-escalate? The narrative structure often mirrors something about your actual situation or your psychological state. Third, identify significant symbols and explore your personal associations. What does water mean to you? What are your memories with water? Do you find it peaceful or frightening? What about the other images? Don't rely on a universal symbol dictionary. Your personal associations are more accurate than generic meanings. Fourth, consider your current life context. What are you actually dealing with? What worries occupy your mind? What challenges are you facing? How might the dream relate to these? Dreams often address current concerns, sometimes obvious, sometimes metaphorical. Here's a practical example. A dream of drowning. The emotion is frightening. The narrative shows yourself overwhelmed by water. Significant symbol. Water. Your personal associations. Perhaps water reminds you of a near-drowning experience. Or perhaps you love swimming and find water peaceful. Current life context. Perhaps you're overwhelmed with responsibilities. Or perhaps you're feeling emotionally flooded. Interpretation. The dream is highlighting something in your life that feels overwhelming. For someone with responsibility overload, it's saying you're drowning in obligations. For someone emotionally overwhelmed, It's showing the emotional submersion. The symbol is water, something that can nurture or overwhelm. Your unconscious is saying this feels like drowning. The dream isn't predicting actual drowning. It's using drowning as a metaphor for a psychological or practical condition. The work then becomes what in your life actually feels like drowning. What needs attention? What needs to change? Importantly, interpretation isn't certainty. Dreams often have multiple valid interpretations. The goal is understanding, not absolute truth. You're looking for meaning that resonates with your actual life. That offers insight you hadn't consciously recognized. That points towards something needing attention. The section emphasizes interpretation's pragmatic purpose. Understanding what the unconscious mind is trying to communicate so you can respond consciously. This is dialogue between conscious and unconscious mind. The unconscious is offering information and perspective. The conscious mind can choose to act on it. The conclusion establishes that dream interpretation is a skill that develops with practice. Most people find their interpretive accuracy improves substantially within weeks. You begin to recognize patterns in your own dreams. You develop intuition about what your particular symbols mean. You learn your own dream language. Ancient initiates would sleep in sacred temples, asking specific questions. They would wake with answers. Modern sleep researchers studying lucid dreaming and dream-guided problem-solving are discovering that the unconscious mind can indeed be asked and does respond. Beyond interpretation is active engagement with dreams. The advanced technique the ancient mystery religions developed and the technique modern consciousness researchers are validating. Asking your unconscious mind directly for what you need. This begins with lucid dreaming, becoming aware you're dreaming while you're dreaming. It's not as mysterious as it sounds. Most people can learn this skill. Some people naturally slip into lucidity. Others develop it through practice and attention. The technique is simple. Throughout the day, ask yourself, am I dreaming? And look for signs that would indicate dreaming, like impossible physics or dreamlike logic. Eventually, you'll ask this during a dream, recognize the signs, and suddenly become aware you're in a dream. What happens when you become lucid in a dream? You retain conscious awareness within the dream. You can communicate with the dream content. You can ask it questions. You can request specific experiences or information. Dream re-entry is a gentler technique. Upon waking from a significant dream, instead of getting up, you stay in the relaxed state and mentally return to the dream. You re-enter it imaginatively. Once inside, you can continue the narrative. You can ask characters what they mean. You can ask the dream to reveal more. Intentional dream dialogue is simpler still. Before sleep, you ask a question or state a need directly, not tentatively, with genuine focus and intention. I need to understand why I'm afraid of commitment. I need guidance about whether to take this job. I need to know what my body needs to heal. You ask specifically and sincerely. Then you go to sleep. Often, when you practice this, the unconscious mind addresses your question in dreams. You wake with insights you hadn't consciously considered. Sometimes the dream directly answers the question. Sometimes it reveals something you needed to know to answer the question yourself. Does this work? Modern sleep researchers studying lucid dreaming and dream-guided problem-solving confirm that the unconscious mind can indeed be asked, and does respond. People report using lucid dreams to solve creative problems, to gain insight into relationship difficulties, to access emotional and physical healing, to explore aspects of identity and potential. The mechanism is simple. The unconscious mind is responsive to intention and attention. When you focus genuinely on a question, the unconscious mind takes that focus as instruction. During sleep, it processes the question. The REM state, with logic offline and emotional intuitive processing heightened, is ideal for creative problem solving. And so the answer often appears as dream content. The conclusion establishes that active dream work represents the most powerful application of ancient dream knowledge. Not passive interpretation, but active engagement. Asking the unconscious directly, listening to its response, creating dialogue between conscious and unconscious mind. This is how ancients used dreams as tools for guidance, healing, and wisdom. It's how they transformed consciousness, and it remains the most direct path to what dreams have always offered: access to intelligence larger than the individual conscious mind. If dreams are merely random neural activity, why are they structured like stories with narrative arc, emotional meaning, and message? Why do they almost always address something the dreamer is currently struggling with? Why do they so reliably reveal what the person needs to understand? We shift now to the deepest question. Not what do dreams mean, but why do we have them at all? What is their actual purpose? Modern science offers several frameworks. The evolutionary framework is the most conventional. Dreams serve survival functions. Processing threats simulates danger scenarios, so you're better prepared for actual danger. Consolidating learning moves information from short-term into long-term memory. Working through fears and challenges in symbolic form reduces anxiety in waking life. This explains some dreams. But it doesn't explain their symbolic complexity. It doesn't explain their apparent guidance toward wisdom and integration. It doesn't explain why dreams so reliably address current challenges in meaningful ways. There's another framework: consciousness evolution. Perhaps dreams aren't merely a survival mechanism, but rather a mechanism through which consciousness itself develops and evolves. This is more speculative, but more intriguing. If consciousness is evolving, as evolutionary theory suggests, what would be the mechanism of that evolution? Dreams might be it. Dreams seem designed to expand perspective. They remove the constraints of logical analysis that limit waking consciousness. They integrate fragmented aspects of self. They confront consciousness with shadow, aspects we deny in waking life. They present possibilities we haven't consciously considered. They access memory and knowledge that conscious mind can't ordinarily reach. If you want consciousness to evolve, these are exactly the things you'd need. You'd need it to expand beyond logic. You'd need it to integrate rather than remain fragmented. You'd need it to face what it's denying. You'd need it to imagine possibilities beyond its current understanding. History repeatedly shows this pattern. Before significant personal transformation, significant dreams often appear. Before cultural shifts, creative individuals report that dreams contributed to their vision. Before major breakthroughs, people report coming through dreams. This suggests that dreams aren't just processing past experience, they're actively facilitating future development. This points toward a hypothesis that Jungian modern consciousness researchers explore. The unconscious mind is attempting to guide consciousness toward greater integration, wisdom, and wholeness. Dreams aren't random noise. They're communications from a part of ourselves that sees more and understands more than our conscious perspective. They're attempts to move consciousness toward evolution. This matches what ancients believed about gods, attempting to guide humans toward morality, wisdom, and enlightenment. Whether we call it God or unconscious mind, the same dynamic appears. There's something within us, something larger than our individual conscious ego, that's oriented toward our growth and integration. The conclusion suggests that dreams may serve an evolutionary function at the level of consciousness itself. They're pushing consciousness toward integration, wisdom, and psychological wholeness. They're the mechanism through which consciousness develops. They're not side effects or byproducts. They're the primary work consciousness does during sleep. Every ancient tradition that studied dreams reached the same conclusion. Humans are fragmented, and wholeness is possible. Dreams appear to be consciousness's technology for healing that fragmentation. That's not metaphor. That's the repeated message across thousands of years and thousands of cultures. Across ancient dream traditions, a consistent message emerges. Dreams are guiding humans toward integration and wholeness. This appears not as mystical philosophy, but as repeated observation. The psyche fragments naturally through life experience. We develop personas, masks we show to the world. We repress aspects of ourselves. We identify with limited versions of ourselves. Dreams seem designed to counter this fragmentation. Dreams repeatedly ask the dreamer to acknowledge shadow, the rejected, repressed, denied parts of self. They present the disowned. They ask recognition and integration. They show consequences of remaining fragmented and benefits of integration. The ancient concept of the unified self is this. Human development involves moving from fragmentation toward wholeness. The self includes conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, intellect and emotion, body and spirit. Wholeness means integrating all of this. Dreams appear designed to teach this integration. Consider examples of how this plays out. A person who consciously identifies as kind might dream of themselves being cruel, angry, or selfish. Rather than dismissing this as the dream being false, dream work suggests recognizing that these capacities exist within the whole self. You contain cruelty, you contain anger, you contain selfishness. These aren't errors, they're part of your psychological makeup. Integration comes from acknowledging them, not denying them. From understanding them, not repressing them. A person who identifies as weak might dream of themselves being powerful, threatening, or aggressive. Rather than dismissing this as fantasy, integration involves acknowledging that power exists within the whole self. You contain strength. You contain the capacity for aggression. You contain the ability to threaten others. Integration means acknowledging these capacities and choosing consciously how to relate to them. This is different from allowing them to control you. Integration doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means consciously recognizing what's within you, acknowledging it, understanding it, choosing consciously how to relate to it. This gives you agency. Repression gives the disowned part unconscious power over you. The remarkable consistency across cultures is that human development involves moving from fragmentation toward integration, from partial identification toward wholeness, from conflict between parts toward harmony. Dreams facilitate this journey. They highlight what's being denied. They insist on acknowledgement. They work towards psychological wholeness. The section explores how this isn't arbitrary. Fragmentation creates suffering, internal conflict, self-sabotage, symptoms both psychological and physical. Wholeness creates coherence, internal peace, authenticity, health. The dreams aren't suggesting you're broken and need to be fixed. They're suggesting you're partially conscious of yourself and could become more conscious. They're inviting integration. They're saying you're larger and more complex than you've acknowledged. Come to know all of yourself. Accept all of yourself. Then you can consciously choose how to live. The conclusion positions dreams as the unconscious mind's attempt to help consciousness see the whole person. Not just the comfortable, acceptable parts, but the whole. The integration project is the actual purpose of dreams. Movement from fragmentation toward wholeness. Movement from denial toward acknowledgement. Movement from unconscious reactivity toward conscious choice. Perhaps dreams aren't a side effect of sleep. Perhaps they're the most important thing consciousness does. The process through which it evolves toward greater understanding, integration, and wholeness. The final philosophical territory. Positioning dreams within the context of existence and cosmology. If we observe reality at every scale, we see patterns. Atoms organize into molecules, molecules into organisms, organisms into ecosystems, ecosystems into biosphere, biosphere into conscious civilization. At every level, there's movement toward increasing integration and complexity. This isn't random, it's the pattern of creation itself. Reality tends toward organization. Consciousness tends toward complexity. Everything moves toward greater integration and wholeness. The proposition, consciousness itself, follows this pattern, moving from fragmented awareness toward integrated wholeness. Dreams might be the mechanism through which individual consciousness participates in this cosmic pattern of integration and evolution. Dreams aren't anomalies. They're consciousness doing what consciousness is meant to do. Integrating, expanding, evolving. The section draws parallels between what ancient peoples said about dreams and what modern physics and biology tell us about reality. That everything is interconnected. That consciousness seems integral to reality rather than separate from it. That the universe tends toward greater complexity and order, despite entropy's pull toward chaos. The narrative suggests that ancients understood intuitively what modern science is beginning to confirm. Consciousness is not separate from existence but integral to it. Dreams might be consciousness's primary tool for its own evolution and integration. The conclusion positions the entire exploration of ancient dream meanings within this larger context. Ancients weren't studying marginal phenomena. They were studying consciousness itself at its most direct. The place where the individual mind touches something larger. The place where personal identity encounters universal patterns. The place where the finite meets the infinite. The place where consciousness evolves. Ancient dream temples required going to sacred places and spending days in ritual. Modern dream practice requires keeping a notebook. What changed isn't the dream, it's the access point. We can have what ancients had without their structure. The practical question: how do we engage with ancient dream wisdom in modern life? The answer doesn't require reconstructing ancient temples or adopting ancient cosmology wholesale. It requires preserving core practices while adapting them to contemporary circumstances. A framework for personal dream practice emerges from both ancient and modern understanding. 4 phases that work together. First, intention and preparation. The ancient practice of setting intention before sleep. Modernized. Before bed, spend a moment in genuine consciousness. What do you want to understand? What question are you asking? What do you want to learn? The conscious statement of intention shapes the unconscious mind's processing during sleep. The intention becomes the frame through which the unconscious addresses the night's dreaming. This takes 30 seconds. It's free. It dramatically improves dream relevance. Second, record and remember. The ancient practice of documenting dreams. Keep a notebook beside your bed. The moment you wake, before getting up, write down whatever you remember about dreams, even fragments, even just emotional tone. This takes 5 minutes. The act of writing anchors the dream memory, moving it into longer-term storage. It signals to your brain that you value dreams, which shapes future encoding. Third, interpretation and dialogue. The ancient practice of discussing and interpreting dreams. This can happen in multiple ways. Personal reflection, spending time with the dream, exploring what it's addressing. Discussion with trusted others, a partner, a friend, a therapist. Working with professional dream workers trained in interpretation. Journaling and writing about what the dream means. All of these deepen understanding and move interpretation from intellectual exercise into lived integration. Fourth, integration and application. The ancient practice of allowing dream insights to inform decision-making. This is where interpretation becomes action. What is the dream teaching me? How should I respond? What needs to change? The unconscious mind hasn't communicated just to be interesting. It's offering guidance about actual life. Integration means consciously considering dream messages alongside rational analysis, allowing dreams to inform choices. The section addresses common modern obstacles. People say they're too busy, too skeptical, too disconnected from sleep and dreams. The narrative presents realistic time requirements. 5 to 10 minutes daily for dream work produces measurable benefits. Not hours, not expensive therapy, just consistent, modest attention. The section explores how modern psychology has created practices compatible with ancient dream work. Jungian dream analysis, existential dream exploration, trauma-informed dream work. These aren't identical to ancient practice. They use modern psychological language, but they're informed by the same understanding. Dreams are meaningful, symbolically structured communications from the unconscious mind deserving serious attention. The evidence from such practices is substantial. Increased self-understanding, improved psychological integration, better decision-making, greater access to creativity and intuition. These outcomes are documented repeatedly. They're not mystical claims, but consistent reports from people practicing dream work in modern therapeutic contexts, it says. The narrative concludes by establishing that modern dream practice doesn't require rejecting modern life. It requires carving space for ancient practice within it. Not reconstructing temples, not spending weeks in ritual, but taking seriously the dreams you're already having. Remembering them, exploring them, learning from them, allowing them to guide you. This is available to anyone. It costs nothing. It requires no special talent. It's skill development, You learn to listen to something that's been speaking to you your entire life. Humans spent thousands of years developing a technology for psychological transformation and accessing unconscious wisdom. We abandoned it for 200 years. Now we're slowly, expensively rediscovering it. The question is, how long should we take to return to something that works? We reflect now on the entire journey. We began with wonder at how ancients treated dreams as sacred. We trace specific systems they developed across multiple civilizations. We examined mechanisms they discovered. We saw how modern science confirmed their insights. We explored practical applications. We investigated the deepest purposes of dreams. Now we ask, what did modern culture lose when it dismissed dreams, and what can we reclaim? The loss wasn't merely historical curiosity. It was the loss of something with real measurable consequences. When cultures abandoned dream work, they lost a primary technology for self-understanding. They lost a gateway to personal transformation. They lost access to psychological healing. They lost a path to unconscious wisdom. They lost the most direct technology for consciousness evolution available to humans. The modern costs of this loss are evident around us. Psychological fragmentation has become epidemic. Anxiety and depression reach record levels. People struggle to access intuition or gut wisdom. They remain stuck in habitual patterns, unable to access deeper aspects of self that might suggest alternatives. They experience disconnection from the deeper aspects of themselves, the parts that dreams carry. The narrative doesn't claim dreams alone would solve these problems, but it notes that the loss of dream work as a standard practice coincided with the rise of these psychological difficulties. The absence of a technology for integration has left us fragmented. The absence of a practice for accessing unconscious wisdom has left us making decisions from only conscious perspective. The absence of a structure for facilitating transformation has left us stuck. Reclaiming dream work doesn't mean returning to ancient beliefs uncritically. It means recovering the practice with modern understanding. It means approaching dreams as both modern neuroscience and ancient wisdom understand them, as meaningful communications from the unconscious mind carrying real information. The reclamation means several concrete things. Making dream work part of psychological health practice, as some therapists and counselors are beginning to do. Including dream work in education, teaching people, especially young people, to remember, interpret, and work with dreams. Developing personal dream practices, individuals keeping journals, interpreting dreams, asking their unconscious mind for guidance. Culturally normalizing dreams as carriers of meaning, as consciousness shifts and stigma dissolves. The evidence that even modest engagement with dreams produces measurable benefits is substantial. People report greater self-understanding, more frequent insights about problems and challenges, better problem-solving across domains, improved psychological integration, deeper access to creativity, more meaningful spiritual and personal experience. These aren't mystical claims. They're reported outcomes from people practicing dream work consistently. The narrative establishes that reclaiming ancient dream wisdom isn't about becoming primitive or superstitious. It's about recovering a technology that demonstrably works, that produces genuine benefits for human consciousness and development, that modern culture abandoned not because it was proven ineffective, but because it didn't fit the intellectual framework we were operating within. That framework, pure materialism, pure rationalism, wasn't actually serving us well. It produced remarkable scientific advances, but it left the deepest parts of being human underdeveloped. We optimized for external knowledge and forgot about internal wisdom. We developed technology and forgot about consciousness. We learned how to manipulate the external world and lost skill at understanding ourselves. The reclamation of dream work is part of a larger rebalancing. Not rejecting modernity, not returning to ancient ways wholesale, but recovering dimensions of human experience modernity has marginalized. Taking seriously the interior life, honoring the unconscious, recognizing intelligence that exists beyond logic, developing practices for accessing it. What if the next revolution in human development isn't technological, but psychological? A return to technologies for consciousness development we once understood and then abandoned. What if dreams are humanity's next frontiers, and we've been too busy looking at screens to notice? We expand from personal to cultural perspective. What would be different in contemporary society if dreams were treated with the seriousness ancients afforded them? At the psychological level, a culture seriously engaged with dreams would likely experience lower rates of psychological fragmentation and dissociation. People would have better access to intuition and gut wisdom, more authentic self-knowledge, greater psychological resilience, more meaningful personal development, not as alternatives to therapy or medicine, but as complements, regular spiritual hygiene for the psyche. At the medical level, dreams would be taken seriously as diagnostic tools. Earlier identification of health issues, since dreams reveal psychological and physical states. Integration of psychological and physical medicine. Acknowledging what ancient practitioners knew. Body and mind aren't separate. Recovery of the mind-body connection modern medicine has largely abandoned. Not replacing medical science, but enriching it with dimensions modern medicine often ignores. At the creative level, direct access to unconscious creativity, the source of genuine innovation and artistic breakthrough. More meaningful art and literature emerging from engagement with unconscious depths. More cultural creativity, more innovation, more genuine cultural production, rather than mechanical reproduction of existing forms. At the decision-making level, major decisions informed not just by rational analysis but by unconscious wisdom. Integration of multiple forms of knowledge, analytic and intuitive. Better decisions because they incorporate information both hemispheres of the brain can provide. Problems solved more elegantly because unconscious pattern recognition has access to information conscious analysis misses. At the spiritual level, reconnection with the dimension of experience ancients understood as sacred or divine. Recovery of practices for accessing expanded consciousness. Return to the understanding that consciousness is larger than individual ego, that something speaks through us, that wisdom is available through dreams. The narrative doesn't claim dreams alone would solve modern problems, but suggests they represent a technology for human development and transformation we foolishly abandoned. History offers examples. Cultures that maintain dream practices and their outcomes. Less psychological fragmentation, more meaningful culture, stronger sense of collective purpose. The presence of dream work as a normal practice seems to have psychological and cultural benefits. The conclusion positions the return to serious dream work as part of larger rebalancing, not rejecting modernity, but recovering dimensions of human experience modernity has marginalized. Not primitive, but wise. The final paragraph invites the audience to understand themselves as participating in recovery. By taking their own dreams seriously, by encouraging others to do so, by creating space for this practice, they're contributing to larger cultural transformation. The recovery of ancient dream wisdom is already underway, quietly, in therapeutic offices, meditation rooms, bedside notebooks. As more people engage with this wisdom, its cultural effects will gradually expand. A generation from now, taking dreams seriously might be as normal as journaling. A generation after that, dream work might be standard in schools and therapeutic practice. The transformation begins with individuals, with you, choosing to listen, choosing to remember, choosing to learn the language of your unconscious mind. We return to the opening image. An ancient person lying beneath stars, wondering about their dreams. We're in the same position, asking the same questions. We dream every night. Like our ancestors, we can choose to listen or dismiss, to interpret or forget, to engage or ignore. You're an inheritor of this ancient knowledge. You're a practitioner of ancient technology, whether you acknowledge it or not. Every night, you access the same communion with the unconscious that ancients called divine. Every night, you receive communication from deeper parts of yourself. The question is only whether you'll pay attention. The epilogue acknowledges both frameworks. The scientific understanding of dreams, neurochemistry, memory consolidation, symbol processing, and the spiritual understanding, connection to something larger, access to wisdom beyond individual perspective. These aren't contradictory, they're complementary ways of describing the same profound phenomenon. You can honor both. The invitation is to approach your own dreams with the wonder ancients brought, not as primitive superstition, but as genuine access to dimensions of consciousness and wisdom worth serious attention. Every night offers what the ancients understood: communication from the deeper self, insight into who you are, guidance about how to live, access to wisdom larger than your individual conscious perspective. The ancient dream interpreter's greatest discovery wasn't hidden in distant temples. It wasn't locked in sacred texts. It was always in the most intimate place. The mind of the dreamer, your consciousness, your dreams, your access to the unconscious intelligence that knows you more completely than your conscious mind ever can. The final thought: dreams are eternal. They appear each night. They carry the accumulated wisdom of human consciousness across all cultures and all time. They speak in symbols and metaphors recognized across millennia. They address the same fundamental human challenges: transformation, integration, wisdom, wholeness, that humans have always faced. By engaging with your dreams, you're not doing something new. You're joining a conversation that's been ongoing for thousands of years. You're listening to a voice that's always been speaking. You're learning a language that's always been available. The mystery of being alive and conscious in an existence we only partially understand. That's what dreams point toward. Not answers, but deeper questions. Not certainty, but invitation to know yourself more fully. Not prediction of external futures, but revelation of internal truths. The night awaits. Your unconscious mind is waiting. The dreams are waiting. Everything the ancients understood about consciousness, expressing itself through sleep and dreams, is available to you right now. The only question is whether you'll listen.